Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Fundamentals of English Language and Literature Teaching, which is paper number 10 of semester 3 of MA English Part 2. In this video, we talk about the approaches and methods that is prescribed to you in Unit 3. And the topic of today's discussion is the structural approach. As already stated, an approach is different theories about the nature of language and how languages are learned. A method implies different ways of teaching a language, and a technique is classroom activities with respect to various approaches and methods used. We have a number of approaches like the structural approach that gives emphasis to the structures of a language, the lexical approach that gives emphasis to the vocabulary items of the language, the communicative approach stresses on the communicative aspects of the speaker. The humanistic approach gives emphasis on the psychological base of the learners. The natural approach gives emphasis to the natural order of language learning, and the task-based language teaching and approach it gives emphasis on the learner doing the task and thereby learning the language. Let's today in this video concentrate on the structural approach. The structural approach, as the name suggests, is built around the structures. The structural approach believes that the mere words do not form the language, and hence it is also called as the oral approach or the oral approach. The approach is a technique wherein the learner masters the pattern of sentence. Structures are different arrangements of words in one accepted style or the other. It includes various modes in which clauses, phrases, or words might be ordered to structure a sentence. It is based on the assumptions that language can be best learned through a scientific selection and grading of the structures or patterns of sentences and vocabulary. If we can define the structural approach, it could be explained as it's a language consists of structures and that the mastery of these structures is more important than the acquisition of mere vocabulary. Since structure is what is important and unique about a language, early practice should focus on the mastery of the phonological and grammatical structures rather than the mastery of vocabulary items. The teaching and learning of the basic items or materials that constitute the framework of language are taught, and structures are an internal ordering of linguistic item, and hence the entire syllabus will have the structures prescribed very carefully to be mastered by the student. The objectives of structural approach are to lay the foundation of English by establishing through drills and repetition of about 275 graded structures. To enable the children to attain mastery over an essential vocabulary of about 3,000 root words for active use. To correlate the teaching of grammar and composition with the reading lesson. To teach the four fundamental skills, namely understanding through listening, speaking, then reading and writing in the order names. To lay proper emphasis on the oral is to listen, oral is to speak, oral approach of all the structures of a language. The main features of structural approach could be that it gives emphasis to number one, the word order of the language. Word order or pattern of the form is very important in language. For example, Rama read the book and read Rama the book. The same words are given in different order. One should understand that Rama read the book makes a proper sense. It shows the arrangement or pattern of words, and the same pattern of words are drilled into the student. Number two, the presence of function words. By function words, which help in modifying the meaning, uh, we mean the tenses are given importance and the various other structures dealing with the functional words are given importance. For example, I wrote a letter has got a different function because it has used a simple past verb form. I'm writing a letter has got a different function which emphasizes the action being done right then at the time of speaking, as the tense that is used is present continuous. And I will write a letter has got a different function, predicting the futurity, because it uses the modal auxiliary verb will and expresses the future time. So these are given emphasis with form and function. The number three, the use of inflections. The inflections are the affixes that you add to the basic vocabulary items like the nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs without changing the word class of the words. These are helpful for doing again different functions of the language. The verbal inflections like the third person singular verbal marker S form, the present progressive marker ing, the past tense marker ed, the past perfect marker ed2 are the various inflections of the verbs. The inflections for the nouns could be the plural marker s and sometimes maybe the gender marker also s or ews. The adjectival and adverbial markers, which are inflections, are by adding er and est. Er for comparative degree, est for superlative degree. Such grammatical concepts are given, or structural concepts are given more importance, and they are drilled properly into the mind of the student for memorizing and thereby picking up of the language. The principles of the structural approach are given by Professor F.G. French. According to him, the principles could be summed up as the importance of framing language habits is emphasized in structural approach. The importance of speech is emphasized where the structural approach is based upon the principle of effective use of speech, and the importance of pupils activity is given importance, the oral work as well as the oral work is listening, oral work is speaking. So the correct speech forms or the structures are given in the class to the students by the teacher. These structures are listened by the students, picked up by the students through proper drills and repetitions, and are repeated in terms of speaking and in terms of writing. The structural approach believes that each language has its own grammar, and teaching of the grammar of the target language ensures the picking up of the language. The creation of different types of meaningful situations by dramatization, facial expression, actions, etc., also is stressed along with the teaching of the grammatical items. One item of language is taught at one time, and the mastery of the language item is aimed at. Thereby, the mastery of these language structures one after the other will automatically ensure the mastery of the language. The theoretical base of structural approach is strongly influenced by the behavioristic theory of language learning, especially of B.F. Skinner's theory of operant conditioning. It believes in habit formation. Reinforcement or reward is a key element in it. Reinforcement encourages repetition, which leads to the formation of the habit. The behavioristic theory believes that language learning is habit formation. Broad characteristic features of the structural approach are the primacy of speech. Heavy drills for the structures is what is important, with the emphasis on listening and speaking skills. The teaching of the grammar and composition in carefully selected and graded way is emphasized. The use of substitution tables to memorize and master the structures is what is the method that is followed. Presenting the structures in specified situation with structural, oral, and situational methodology is followed, and hence sometimes it is also called as SOS. Structural, oral, you have to listen and repeat, and situational. These structures are correlated to the situations. So SOS approach it is called as. The selection of the structures is done basically with the following criteria. Number one, the structures that are selected are to be useful. They should be easy to produce. They should be simple. They should have the criteria of teachability and learnability, covering a wide range that the student is or the learner is acquainted with in the society. These selected structures are now graded according to grouping, and sequencing. The grouping can be phonetic grouping, lexical group, grammatical grouping, semantic grouping, and structural grouping. The sequencing also can be grammatical sequencing, semantic sequencing based upon the meaning, and lexical sequencing based upon the vocabulary. Various types of patterns of sentences with phrase and clause patterns are introduced to the students carefully, first starting with the two-part patterns, which will have just the subject and the verb, then the three-part patterns with SVO, SVC, and SVA, and then the four-part patterns with SVOA, SVOC, and then patterns beginning with their, it, WH words, patterns related to the commands and requests. Formal patterns are introduced, and then the informal patterns also are introduced, so that the student will be acquainted with all the structures of the language. Later, and as a fourth part, the gradation of the structure goes to the sentence patterns, which will be assertive or declarative sentence or the statement of facts, interrogative sentences, both yes no type, WH type, and question tags, imperative sentences, both commands and requests, and exclamatory sentences. So carefully these structures are selected first and graded and are introduced to the student for practice. The structural approach, as is given by Firth, the British linguist, suggests that situations are important to learn a language along with the structures. Only then they carry a meaning. The British linguists formed the British Council to make the textbooks related to the structural approach. In India, in Madras, the Madras English Language Teachers Campaign, NELT, is formed in 1952-53 that followed completely the structural approach books that are made by British Council, which believed in systematic planning of materials, teacher trainings according to the materials prepared, classroom pedagogy, etc. and etc. for the second language situation. The same methodology accepted by the Madras Teachers Language Association is adopted in Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Kerala, and Regional Institute of English, Bangalore. The teacher training institutions were established. English learning materials were produced accordingly in India. By 1960-79, when the Kothari Commission has been standardized and is accepted and implemented all over the country, a number of textbooks were being written based upon this model of structural approach to be implemented in the school in India. The syllabus of a structural approach will have language is primary, and so a list of basic structures and sentence patterns of English are introduced. All structures and vocabulary items are first orally taught, then reading, then writing. LSR and then W. Listening, speaking, reading, followed by the writing skill. Language is a set of habits, so ample of practice and drills are given introducing these structures to the students. The use of mother tongue is avoided and language is explained in situations. The learner deduces the meaning in contexts and situations. Mother tongue is fairly avoided. The syllabus believes in introducing 250 basic structures which are carefully selected and graded, followed by 2,500 to 3,000 vocabulary items, which are again carefully selected and graded, spread across 5 to 7 years of study of English, maybe 3rd standard to 10th standard or 5th standard to 10th standard. All these structures which are carefully selected and graded are distributed so that by the end of the 10th standard, the student masters at least 250 to 270 basic structures of English, along with 2,500 to 3,000 basic vocabulary items of English, thereby achieving the mastery of the language. But the structural approach has got its own dissatisfactions or limitations, and the critique to structural approach could be that the structural approach does not help to build communicative competence, which is most essential these days. It emphasizes on 250 structures and 2,500 vocabulary items to be introduced in the form of textbooks to the students. But it does not emphasize or it does not bring about the communicative competence among the learners. It is easier to introduce these structures at the lower levels, but at the later levels, at the higher levels of secondary and higher secondary, when the learners are not to negotiate meaning, they cannot. This is difficult to implement. It becomes dull and uninteresting at the later stages. Learners are used to only the structures they are exposed to, and there is no originality in their expression. All learners will speak in a similar way without any creativity in their speech, because speech is completely based upon the substitution tables, and the learners speak up the language parroting them. Learners are not happy while the teachers are very happy with it. It ignores the speaker's competence to produce continuous sentences, which are also referred to as performance, speech acts, rhetorical acts, or semiotic acts by the linguists. Many a times, a learner may use wrong substitutions to convey a meaning which structural approach advocates. And so it does not give importance to the learner and his cognitive capabilities. Completely based upon the behavioristic model, the structural approach has got its own advantages but also with its limitations. Thank you very much for being a part of this presentation on structural approach. Wait for the other videos for other approaches.